Okay, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to tune in to listen to the audio if you're connecting into the audio. Today, I have with me my dear brother, Kenn Strickland, a Black man in America today during this time. And we have a space here and some time to just share some wisdom around what's going on and what's it like to be a Black man in America right now, Kenn?
To be Black in America, a Black man in America, is just to realize the painful intersectionality of race, class, and gender under a society that considered you from the very foundation of its core, 3/5 of a man. And how does it look to live in a country rooted in slavery, literally cleared with the blood of the Native Americans? Where do we in this country offer space for people of color, women of color, men of color to process and be free? So to be Black in America means that you will never be free, but you'll be free enough to support the white capitalist agenda. So it's a very scary time in America for Black people in general. We're deemed essential workers. So we work at Targets and Walmarts in this Corona pandemic, but we're not essential enough to not die. So it's just a weird nexus to be Black in America. You're essential enough to work and make white folks rich, but you're not essential enough for them to care about your life. The American legacy is one of oppression. So there's always a shadow on everything we do. Um, because we were built, like I was saying, this country was built on on the backs of slaves on Native American land. And that legacy of harm and hurt and trauma is ingrained in what it means to be American. So we see these protests not in isolation, but as a continuation of oppressive practices that began before this country even started. Um, it began with the British colony and our treatment of Native Americans. Um, and from there, the white capitalist arm is just exploiting the cheapest labor pool, and in order to do that, they must divide us. So this divisive rhetoric it only serves the 1%, and it's so sad because George Floyd is literally um, just a testament of Black people everywhere. I don't know if you remember in 2000, I think it was 2016. Philando Castile was shot in his car with his girlfriend and his daughter in Minneapolis. So that was just 4 years ago, um, in the same community, same police brutality, and I think people are just tired of it. Um, Trayvon Martin was the start of my political activity. Um, and from there, we went into a whole Black Lives Matter movement. And from there, we came into the age of, Trump. And from there, we're back where we started. So I hope the younger generation, younger than I, they're seeing the pattern, the circle, the sensationalism, the news cycle, the 7-day news cycle. Um, and hopefully we'll see long-term solutions. Yeah.
And I wanted to connect into, we know each other from the spiritual community, from the yoga community, and I want to connect this into that space and how you feel there can be of service for people who work in the light of consciousness and who want to make an active effort to be involved, and how you think people can be involved, in a deeper way, not just in the physical surface way of just 3D reality, but really in the energetic way of more of the subtleties of where we can start to tap into clearing the energy of racism, of oppression, and liberating that within the individual so we can liberate that within the consciousness of the collective, and just how you feel about that.
Hmm. That's a great question, and the question I get asked by white folks all the time is, "What can I do?" And the easiest answer would be educate yourself and don't expect people of color to educate you,
Mhm.
because in that expectation there's privilege, and in that privilege there's oppression. Why is it on the person of color to show you what to do? If you are a person of privilege, you should do something and act within that privilege. um, Audre Lorde says the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. So what you have to do is get new tools. And what yoga and mindfulness are really good at is giving you the tools of awareness. So once you are aware, then you have to build on that awareness in reality. So that looks different to everybody. Um, to some, it might be decolonizing your practice and looking around your yoga studio and seeing your demographic. And if it's, you know, a monolith, then we have to call into question. Another is calling into question, what do you benefit? How do you benefit from a society, a global society that marginalizes poor? How do you benefit? How do we benefit? And acknowledging that we benefit. So those are the two things you can do right now. There's also countless organizations you can donate to. But once again, my concern is not with the physical, it's with the spiritual landscape of a person. So I would say it's just a lot of hard work and self-reflection. I don't have the answer. I really don't. But I will say what I'm seeing and what I'm seeing people deconstruct in a really kind of cool way is white privilege.
Mhm.
So in some yoga communities, white privilege is disguised as the power of positivity. So if or the law of abundance. So if you are positive enough, if you're mind of abundance, then you can manifest your own money. And that is a privilege. And hopefully we'll see that in order to really truly tackle things on an energetic level, we must know that your privilege is there and is blocking your spiritual ascension. So, all that said, allow people of color to create their own conscious spaces without white people, and really do the self work to analyze what it is and how it is we will power unconsciously, um, and how we might be unconsciously biased. Because in light of George Floyd, there's also Amy Cooper, right? The lady who called the cops um, on, oh, I forget his name. So many people, so many names. Well, he called the cops on somebody who told her to put her dog on the leash. You remember that? Did you see that?
How recent ago was this one?
Like 2 days ago.
Oh no, I did not see that.
Type in Amy Cooper. It's the really like the nexus of like white feminist privilege. Um, really terrible, really terrible. So she calls the police on Christian Cooper. They're not related. Um, saying that she's going to tell them that a black man is scaring her and is trying to hurt her because he told her to put her dog on the leash. So she's essentially weaponizing the police and her privilege to do whatever she wants. Um, and this is sort of like the unwritten rule, and something we have to really examine is where do white women stand? And as a black man, that's a scary question. It's like, where do white women stand?
Mhm.
They're in a weird intersectionality where they're not privileged because they're a woman, but they're more privileged than we are, and wield the power of white privilege. So where they're not like us because they're women and we're men, and I hold that privilege. They also um, defer to the white masculine protection. So whenever something crazy goes on, they defer to the institutional systemic arm to get what they want. Does that make sense?
It does. And I feel like that I have faith right now that I feel like that's what's changing, that there's an awakening that that exists, that this the murder of George Floyd has really caused an even deeper wave where everyone across the board is being forced to re-examine their relationship to privilege, and that white women are actually taking the moment in the space to look at the subtleties of the way they're upholding racist structures. And I don't think it's just white women. Of course, I think all of us, even people of color, also uphold these racist and systemic systems of oppression. Like, we're all supporting this. That is why it exists. So I hear exactly what you're saying. And I wanted to go back to something else that you had said around um, how give Black people and people of color a space without white people to gather and to do this work. Is that what you said?
Yes, that's what I said. And I say it a little clearer this time. Give the black culture space to be by itself. Every other culture in the world gets their own space, their own community without even having to answer to the privilege of whiteness or be demanded up, or have the demand placed upon them that they open their community. That is a uniquely African American thing where your community has to be open to others. There is no shame, there is no guilt, there is no racism in having a closed community. Most people with a strong sense of who they are, a strong sense of culture, a strong sense of spirituality, a strong family system, extended and nuclear, come from communities in which they have their values are represented everywhere they go.
Mm,
In America, that was um, segregation. Now, the terrible thing with Jim Crow is that you weren't equal in public places and that you had to literally be less than a human to go outside. But when you did get into your community, your values and morals were reflected in the fabric of that community. Fast forward today, we're free to drink from the same water fountain and do the same things, but the fabric of your community does not represent morals or your culture at all. And a matter, I would go so far as to say it demonizes most aspects of your culture except the entertainment aspect.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And what does that mean? And what does integration even mean at this moment?
Mm.
And if we look at your history and we look at what the moment calls for, which is radical spiritual unity, then it cannot um, look like integration, because integration required black bodies to move into white spaces, but white bodies never moved into black spaces, and that set up um, a really kind of gnarly precedent in America, where any type of progress that is going to be made is going to be made because people of color basically assimilated. It's not that white people um, come over to our side and learn our culture and participate in our events. We go over to their side and do their things and do their stories. And this radical unity is going to have to blow that all apart. And it's really going to have to look at the landscape created in these last, 3 or 4 years. Why is it that in gentrified neighborhoods, white people are the only people that can live there without getting the cops called on them? Why is that? Why is it that when, you know, Caucasians come into your neighborhood, they weaponize the police to get us all out of there, and then it becomes an all-white neighborhood? Why is it that we can't have mixed neighborhoods? You see, why does the whole neighborhood have to be white? When we see mixed neighborhoods in the Latino part of town, in the in the Indian, um, all these different parts of town, they're integrated. But when you come to the white part of town, it's a monolith. Why is that? What is it in the heart of white culture that demands um, sameness rather than equality?
Mm.
um I don't know. The easiest, most like heartfelt thing would be like, we are moving into a 5D dimension where race doesn't matter, where gender doesn't matter, where it's soul meets soul. And unfortunately, even if that is the case, that doesn't make me an exception to state sanctioned violence. My belief in the 5D, five-dimensional consciousness that we're cultivating, and the angels and plebeian beings watching over us, has nothing to do with the fact that I could get killed at any moment. It's just like nothing to do. Um, and it has nothing to do for about the willed ignorance of, you know, racist white America, because this isn't new. In
Yeah.
fact, it's very old. It's as old as the birth. You have you seen Birth of a Nation?
No, I haven't.
Okay, basically it's a movie where they weaponize white femininity to lynch black men en masse, because they're taking the purity of their women. And white women have been used as a pawn for years to destroy black communities. Years. So it's nothing new. It's absolutely nothing new. And if we get recent, we come to Trayvon Martin and the whole Black Lives Movement that was responded to with aggression by the Make America Great movement. It's like right on the heels of Black Lives Matter was Make America Great. So we see this. We see this. And I don't really think people understand how racist America truly is. I really don't. I'm from the South. I really know. Um, yeah.
I 100% agree. We've had this conversation before when we had previously talked about just subtle racism and how it's such a disease that there's so much ignorance around it, and that people don't understand the ways they're supporting racist structures by just existing. By not actively participating in this inner work and this reflection. And you had said that and said that you don't know the answer, but I feel like that is very connected to the answer. If there is an answer, is really the deep self work in the reflection, because it's going to, there's no outside of us, there's no them, in this process. There really is this structure that each individual is supporting in their own way. This comes from Black people, this comes from Indigenous people, this comes from people of color, this comes from people who don't have pigmented skin. There's a there's all of these small ways in our daily lives, from just from our thought patterns or our behaviors, that are just so normalized in society that people don't know that it's racist. So I feel like that is the next cultural and social revolution and wave that's really coming in right here, right now. That this is a really huge demand for change. I feel the energy so different behind this than any other protest or movement, and I feel like there's a unity coming together, and that we're in this interesting transition space where people are learning how to do this work and to be respectful and to create safe spaces, but also to take responsibility for the work. I find when I'm talking to white people about this work, they come in with this shy attitude where they do this like bashing, the self bashing thing of like, oh, who am I to do this work? I don't know anything about it. I'm not very familiar. And they kind of come in with this like whisper type of thing. And I think that's what a huge thing that's changing and needs to change and is slowly transitioning of. It's like, empower yourself. Like you said, the first thing is education. Empower yourself in the education of this work and make yourself valuable and an asset and a resource to support the change that has to happen. I feel there's no other way.
Right. And I think just to piggyback off of that, the whispers that you hear, I hear them too. And what does it mean to stand firmly as a white woman in America without the backbone of privilege that has held you up for so long? It's hard to stand without that that invisible safety net of privilege. So where it's a privilege not to understand and not to know and not to have to deal, it's a privilege that you can close your door and live in a fantasy world where law and order exist and police are always right, and if they didn't commit a crime then they wouldn't have been punished. It's easy. It requires little to in America because society has been built by white men and women to make it easy for them not to question surroundings. And in that comfort, you lose sight of what's really happening in the world. So that's my biggest fear, is that while we do the work in these yoga spaces, these spaces are so comfortable and so outside of what is actually going on in the streets, which is like the streets are burning, people are dying, tear gas being thrown, and and in the side safety and solace of your sadhana, of your really nice yoga studios, of all of this stuff around us that blocks us from reality. um, I am seeing white women starting to stand up by themselves without having privilege hold them up. But it definitely is a lonely and scary road. It's not like forget. And now I'm with the people because there's a lot of subconscious trauma transferred to white people as well as black people. Um, so I like the fact that people are becoming more aware, but there's always that underlying tendency in the spiritual practice to hide behind what's comfortable instead of really breathing into what is vulnerable, sticky, and really unpleasant. Because this practice calls for us to release generation. your ancestors were slave made, that generational trauma occurred, where the lose privilege, and losing privilege is going to be really hard if you never lived life without it. So that's the test, is how long can you live outside of your privilege to do the work.
I hear you, and thank you for bringing that all up. And I feel like it connects so deeply, especially with people who are in these spiritual communities doing conscious work, because to live without privilege, to learn to walk into those spaces when that's all someone has known their whole life, is a direct threat to their ego, to ego in general. And so there is this whole new vulnerable space of having to break into in oneself, where there it's completely unknown territory, and really putting the selfishness of trying to just support the self down, and really being active in how can we support the collective, how can we support equality, how can we support change, and looking at those places that truly are calling for justice, calling for activism. And I feel like it's so important that anyone who's walking the spiritual path to really take the time to educate and to consciously do social justice work, because there's just a different illumination that can be brought into the space. And I find that this work is only accomplished, it's multi-dimensional, multi-layered. Like, we have to work in all the layers. Like you said, it can't just be in the comfort and privilege of our Zoom meetings and in these safe spaces. It has to, there has to be more than that. There has to be action that backs the energy of these words and these conversations, and people willing to get even more uncomfortable, past their own identity, and, like you said, integrate into other communities. I'm sitting with that, and what that looks like for people, or um, where's the cultural revolution in that, or like how does that exist peacefully, and where everyone's very accepting of each
Yeah,
other in their nature, without just really looking at how this can be supported by love, because I feel like that's really, of course,
yeah,
that's even privileged to say in itself, but it's not all at the same time, because this racism is rooted in hate, and the only way to liberate that is to bring this hate into the light, to feel the energy of it, and to let the love move it. And I feel that on a very fundamental level.
yeah. And I agree with you for the most part. I think the first step, just to get real concrete from sort of away from the theory, is to decenter whiteness in all spaces. Um, so the question is not, when a white person enters a room, is not what can we do as white people, because that centers whiteness. Is what can we do together? And the fundamental shift to decenter whiteness around the globe, and all of the mental trauma that is associated with centering whiteness, from lightening skin to comparing body shapes to this universal Western standard of beauty, all of it, all of the things that come from centering whiteness must go as we decenter whiteness. And what we can, what our allies, what white people can do, is help in that process of being decentered by not centering themselves and asking what we can do, but instead of partnering, um, by not by showing love to local organizations doing the work rather than trying to recreate the wheel. So I completely agree. Racism in this country is fueled by hate, right? But it's founded on an economic system that requires one person to look another person as subhuman so that they can get the lifestyle that they want. And then from that economic system in which you have to dehumanize people so that you can have privilege, here we are. And then we talk about looting, but we never acknowledge that, okay, an African American might be looting from Target, but we never teach in the books that you looted the land from the Native Americans, that you looted the labor from African Americans, Chinese internment camps, that you looted the livelihood and self-esteem of Latinos and Hispanics in ICE. All of this, right? So we have to decenter whiteness, and we have to do it with a level of love and respect for all people of color. And that requires listening to their painful stories and not bypassing that with, let us be positive, or the universe is moving towards, it's tricky. It's tricky. It's just real tricky, because I believe personally in ascension, and that we will transmute and transcend our gross selves as we become more etheric. I believe that. I really truly do. But I also know the pain it is to be like, poverty is a mindset. You should da 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 when there's structures actively in place. So the love in me hopefully will see the love and the laws of this country change, where the laws don't reflect like a silent white supremacist, I guess, structure of America, but it reflects like the truly like equal, beautiful place it is, because it's not all gloom and doom here, as much as it may seem on TV. There's wonderful communities with wonderful allies doing wonderful things. It's just the overarching narrative of America, and race politics is one of exploitation and oppression. Um, but it goes hand in hand, because race was created to sustain an economic system that brought white people money, rich white people, um, rich white people, and we can't forget that.
Absolutely.
It's not, it wasn't that they hated black people, right? It's
Mhm.
that they needed laborers in their field to make money, and they had to rationalize slavery. So then they created race. So is not a biological reality. It's a social construct, purely simple.
There's really there's a lot to unpack here, and there's so many different angles that all of this can be looked at and dissected at. And of course I have a in the past I've had a hyper tendency, the focus on the spiritual level of just like, my part is meditating for peace, um speaking in these forums, sharing my personal experience, and like that being the work. But I've been challenged in this time, to do more, to dig deeper, that I even fell subject into this ego trap of my own comfort and privilege of what I was doing is enough. So I appreciate everything that you've shared, and what you're saying, and that this really isn't a one-time conversation, and it really can't be captured in 20 minutes. But I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity to really get to hear you, and just the sophistication and intelligence that you really bring into this space, Ken, from just the history, the social, the economic, and also into the spiritual, and being able to dance in all of the planes in between. Because um, this is multiplanar, multi-dimensional. So it's not just the spiritual activism. It really goes into a totality of our existence, and to really be awakened and aligned is to be awakened and aligned to the reality that we're living in 3D physical form as well. And I find in my own practice in theory with ascension is that the ascension happens in this plane, and we have to be prepared to be moving in between planes, basically. That yes, there's this higher etherical transition from the carbon based body to the silicon based body, but there's also hard things that are being faced in the physical body that have to be addressed and looked at in our reality, and that comes into this social activism aspect. But thank you, Kenn, for sharing this space, and for really sharing yourself here, and allowing us to keep breaking into this, and opening up the energy for people to educate, to understand, to feel, because there's a lot to feel here.
And one last thing, and this is as and this is something I really appreciate you for. I feel your spiritual lens, and I say keep that, because if you look really closely at the protests, the freedom songs they sing of are meditations. Um, they're psalms, they're songs to God. They're quite literally the prophetic messages of, if you want to put it this way, of the silicon body as they move in the streets with the cadence, with the march. That's mindfulness meditation written all over it. And that's trauma informed, because as you shake, as you scream, you literally throw off the trauma and create a new day. And that's all we are trying to do. So the screams, the trauma, the quote unquote looting, the cathartic release of that, mixed with the songs and the spirituality of the people, um, it will carry us. There's an old I don't know who started this, but in the Black community, it's always said that the prayers of the slaves are the wings that carry us.
Mm.
So it doesn't matter what happens. They end up, whatever may come. We have the prayers of your ancestors, and they will always carry us, because they carried them through, not, I wouldn't compare suffering, but they carried them through a lot of stuff I could not imagine. So with that spiritual wave, and tapping into that with like freedom songs and chants and marches, I think we'll be okay. Um, I just pray for, white society that doesn't have that spiritual core to tap into, because their Christianity has been so corrupted with like, I don't even want to go down that path, but yes,
I think you can encompass it with just that.
uh, yeah, but yeah, so listen to the songs of the people marching, and that is closer to probably what you had in mind for this episode. That's the spiritual heartbeat, and that heartbeat is from all the way from Harriet Tubman, all the way to from the War of 1812, all the way to like Iroquois Nation, helping your founding fathers actually pen something more eloquent than their minds could understand. Uh, yeah, so there we go. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you for opening up space. I do want to see your face before I leave, just because you have good energy. Did you get a haircut?
I did. Look, I shaved my head.
Yeah, it looks good.
Thank you, brother. Yeah. Um,
The hair
lots
that
of,
grows back is going to be really powerful.
thank you. Yeah, it was definitely the releasing of a whole lifetime. when I shaved my head. But I wanted to end this recording and talk to you a little bit offline. But thank you, Kenn, and thank you for everyone who tunes in to this audio of this. And I really hope if you're tuning into the audio that you take the time to really feel these words and not just listen to check a mark off of, to put a check mark in a box, to really take the space to really feel, hear, and integrate these words, and make space for change in your own life, and really feel inspired to do something better. But yes, thank you, everyone. Okay.